Shivering in the mud, an Omega mother watched a slaver lock an iron collar around her only pup's neck. Pack law dictated that debts were paid in flesh, but no one warned the cruel lords of Highcross that the Alpha King was hunting for a family of his own. Wind howled through the rotting timber walls of Oakhaven, carrying with it the bitter promise of a merciless winter. Deep within the territory of the Western Packs, the village was a grim settlement where the weak served the strong without question. Maeve Halloway knelt on the freezing dirt floor of her dilapidated cabin, her raw, blistered hands desperately weaving pine needles and coarse wool into crude blankets. She was an Omega, the lowest tier of the pack hierarchy, but her status mattered little to her. All that mattered was the tiny, shivering bundle of white fur tucked into a wicker basket near the hearth. Finnick was only 4 months old. In his human form, he was a quiet, fragile boy with wide, intelligent blue eyes. In his wolf form, he was a startlingly pure white, a genetic anomaly in a pack known for their muddy brindle coats. That pristine white coat was both a miracle and a curse. Maeve's mate, a fiercely loyal Delta Guard named Arthur, had died 6 months prior during a territorial skirmish along the mountain borders. With Arthur gone, Maeve was stripped of her meager protections. The pack alpha, Gideon Croft, was a tyrant who viewed his subjects strictly as assets or liabilities. A widowed Omega with a pup was a liability. A rare white pup, however, was a highly liquid asset. The heavy oak door of Maeve's cabin shattered inward, splintering off the hinges with a deafening crack. Maeve screamed, throwing her body over the wicker basket as 3 massive enforcers stepped over the threshold. Snow swirled into the room, followed by the heavy, suffocating scent of rotting pine and iron. It was the scent of Gideon Croft. Gideon stepped into the dim light of the cabin. He was a mountain of a man, his face scarred from a dozen challenges to his rule, his eyes devoid of anything resembling empathy. He wore a heavy cloak of bear fur, and his boots crunched against the frost-covered floorboards. "You missed the autumn tithe, Maeve," Gideon rumbled, his voice vibrating in the small space. "I gave you my winter rations," Maeve pleaded, her voice trembling as she pressed her back against the basket. "I gave you Arthur's armor. I have nothing left, Alpha. Please, just give me through the winter. I can mend clothes for the guard." "The guard has no need for an Omega's sloppy stitchwork," Gideon interrupted, stepping closer. He looked down at her, his lips curling into a sneer. By pack law, a widow who cannot contribute to the winter stores must forfeit her property to the pack to cover her debts. "I have no property," Maeve cried. "You are mistaken," Gideon said, his gaze shifting to the basket behind her. He nodded to his lead enforcer, a brute named Duncan. "Take the pup." "No!" Maeve shrieked, her maternal instincts overriding her deeply ingrained Omega submission. She lunged forward, her nails extending into short, desperate claws, aiming for Duncan's face. Duncan backhanded her with the force of a swinging anvil. Maeve crashed into the wooden table, tasting copper as her lips split open. Her vision swam, but the sound of Finnick's terrified, high-pitched whimpering forced her to stay conscious. Duncan lifted the pup by the scruff of his neck. Finnick shifted in his panic, turning into a fluffy, frantic white wolf pup, kicking his tiny paws and yelping for his mother. "A pure white coat," Gideon mused, examining the crying pup with cold, calculating eyes. "The lords in the neutral territories pay handsomely for exotics. He will fetch a high price at the Highcross winter market, more than enough to cover your husband's unpaid debts. He is not property. He is pack," Maeve sobbed, dragging herself across the floor, her fingers clawing at the frozen mud. "He is Arthur's son. You cannot sell him. It defies the old laws." "I am the law in Oakhaven," Gideon sneered. "Prepare the wagons. We ride for Highcross at dawn." Maeve grabbed Gideon's heavy leather boot. "If you take him, kill me. Kill me right now. Because if you separate an Omega from her nursing pup, the goddess will curse this land. You know the old texts, Gideon. The rot will take your crops. Let me go with him. Let me at least ride in the wagon." Gideon paused. The medieval superstitions of the werewolf packs ran deep, and the curse of a grieving Omega was a legend that even ruthless alphas hesitated to test. He kicked her away, his expression souring. "Chain her to the back of the supply cart," Gideon ordered his men. "Let her watch him be sold. Once the transaction is complete, the bond is severed by law, and no curse can touch us. If she survives the trek, she can walk back. The journey to the neutral territory of Highcross took 3 agonizing days through driving sleet and treacherous mountain passes. Maeve walked the entire way, her wrists shackled in heavy iron irons that were tethered to the rear axle of Gideon's supply wagon. Her boots wore thin, her feet bled, and her muscles screamed in agony, but she never stopped walking. Inside the heavily guarded wagon, in a small iron cage, was Finnick. She sang to him through the howling wind. Her voice, cracked and hoarse, carried ancient lullabies of the forest, trying to soothe the terrified pup who spent the entire journey huddled in the corner of his freezing cage. When they finally crested the valley ridge, the sprawling encampment of Highcross came into view. It was not a city, but a massive, squalid bazaar erected in the ruins of an ancient stone fortress. Highcross was a neutral zone where pack laws held no jurisdiction. It was a haven for outcasts, rogue wolves, wealthy lords and slavers. Plumes of thick, black smoke rose from massive iron fire pits, casting a hellish orange glow over the snow-covered tents and wooden auction blocks. The scent of the place hit Maeve like a physical blow, a nauseating mixture of unwashed bodies, fear, sweat, stale blood, and the overwhelming, territorial musk of hundreds of strange alphas. Gideon's men dragged Maeve through the muddy thoroughfare. Traders shouted in a dozen different dialects, bartering pelts, weapons, and flesh. Cages lined the streets, holding rogues who had lost their minds, omegas captured in border raids, and pups stolen from weaker packs. They reached the center of the market, a large stone platform surrounded by a semicircle of grandstand seating meant for the wealthy pack lords and visiting nobility. Gideon hauled Finnick's cage off the wagon. The pup was shivering violently, his white fur matted with dirt and despair. "Put him on the block," Gideon ordered, speaking to Bartholomew, the market's chief auctioneer, a greasy, rat-faced beta in a velvet coat. "Ah, a winter-born wight," Bartholomew purred, his eyes gleaming with greed as he unlocked the cage and dragged Finnick out by a heavy leather slip lead. A rare prize indeed, Alpha Croft. The northern lords will bleed their coffers dry for a pelt like this. "He's meant to be a pet, or a fighting ward," Gideon snapped. "I want gold, Bartholomew. Start the bidding high." Maeve was shoved to her knees beside the stone platform, a guard's heavy boot pressing into her spine to keep her down. She could see Finnick on the block, his tiny body trembling as the crowd of onlookers began to swell. "Look at me, Finn," Maeve whispered, her voice barely carrying over the roar of the crowd. "Look at Mama." The pup's ears twitched, and his wide, terrified blue eyes locked onto hers. The biological tether between an Omega and her pup was a tangible, living thing, and Maeve could feel it stretching, fraying under the sheer terror emanating from her son. "Behold, lords and alphas!" Bartholomew's voice boomed over the crowd, aided by a brass-speaking trumpet. "A pristine white pup, strong bloodline, flawless coat. A perfect companion for a high-born lady, or a rare addition to your fighting pits." The bidding started immediately. Voices rang out from the shadowy grandstands, shouting numbers that Maeve couldn't even comprehend. Gold pieces, silver bars, land deeds. "50 gold crowns!" shouted a fat, perfumed alpha from the eastern valleys. 70, countered a woman wrapped in fox furs. Then, a cold, rasping voice silenced the immediate area. 150 gold crowns. The crowd parted as Lord Harlan approached the block. Harlan was a notorious figure in the Riverlands, a sadistic lord who bred wolves for illegal underground death matches. His face was a map of jagged scars, and his left eye was milky and blind. He leaned on a cane topped with a silver wolf's skull. 150, Harlan repeated, his good eye locked on Finnick with a hungry, malevolent gleam. "I have a pack of black hounds that need a little sport, a white rabbit to chase in the pits. He will learn to fight, or he will learn to bleed." Maeve let out a guttural, inhuman scream. The sound tore from her throat with such primal ferocity that several guards stepped back in shock. It was the true cry of an Omega facing pack loss, a sound of such profound biological agony that it struck the deepest instincts of any wolf within a mile radius. "Silence her!" Gideon roared, furious at the disruption. Duncan raised the hilt of his sword, preparing to strike Maeve across the skull. Maeve didn't care. She thrashed against her chains, her eyes fixed on Harlan. "If you touch him, I will tear your throat out. I will hunt you. I will burn your lands to ash." Harlan simply laughed, tossing a heavy leather pouch of gold onto Bartholomew's table. Spirited mother. A pity she's so ragged, or I'd buy her too. The pup is mine. Bartholomew reached for the gold. Sold to Lord Har. A sound like rolling thunder echoed through the valley, drowning out Bartholomew's words. It wasn't thunder. It was the synchronized rhythmic thud of 100 armored destriers striking the frozen earth. The chaotic din of the High Cross market died instantly. Traders froze mid-barter. Alphas, who had been posturing mere seconds ago, suddenly dropped their gazes to the mud, their inner wolves violently submitting to an overwhelming, crushing aura that flooded the encampment. From the northern ridge, a phalanx of cavalry rode into the market. They wore armor of blackened steel, their cloaks the deep blood red of the Ironhold Kingdom. At the head of the formation rode King Abbot Steves. Abbot was a legend breathed in hushed, terrified whispers among the packs. He was the Alpha King of the North, a monarch who had united the fractured territories through sheer, brutal willpower and uncompromising justice. He was a massive man, broad-shouldered and lethal, with raven-black hair and piercing, glacial silver eyes that missed nothing. He did not rule by cruelty, but by a rigid, unbreakable code of pack law. He was supposed to be in his capital, a month's ride away. No one knew he was conducting a sudden, unannounced inspection of the borderland territories to root out corruption. Abbot pulled on the reins of his massive black stallion, bringing the beast to a halt right at the edge of the auction block. His silver eyes swept over the scene. The shivering white pup on the block, the greedy Lord Harlan, the nervous Gideon Croft, and finally, the bleeding, chained Omega on her knees in the mud. When Abbott's eyes met Maeve's, something fundamental and earth-shattering shifted in the frozen air. For Abbott, the scent of the market was foul, but beneath the blood and filth, a singular scent cut through his senses like a silver blade. Rainwater, crushed pine, and sweet heather. It hit his chest like a battering ram, awakening a primal, dormant instinct he had long assumed was dead. His inner wolf slammed against the confines of his mind, howling a single, undeniable word. Mine. He looked at the Omega. She was broken, bruised, and starving. But the fire in her eyes as she stared down the men trying to take her pup was the fiercest thing the king had ever seen. Abbott dismounted. The ground seemed to shake beneath his boots. His royal guards, lethal warriors all, fanned out seamlessly, creating a perimeter around the auction block. Who holds jurisdiction here? Abbott asked. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a quiet, terrifying resonance that commanded absolute silence. Bartholomew dropped to his knees, his forehead pressing into the dirt. Why, Your Majesty? High Cross is neutral territory. We are a free market. There is no free market within 300 leagues of my borders, Abbott stated coldly, stepping past the auctioneer. He walked toward the block, his gaze fixing on Gideon. Identify yourself. Gideon swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain standing, though his knees trembled. I am Gideon Croft, Alpha of the Oakhaven Pack, Your Grace. And by what right do you sell a nursing pup on a slaver's block? Abbott asked, stopping inches from Gideon. The mother's mate died, Gideon stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Maeve. She owed a winter debt. Pack law dictates. Pack law dictates that Omegas and pups are the protected foundation of our species, Abbott interrupted, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. My decree, issued 5 years ago, outlawed the separation of a mother and a pup under the age of 1 year for any debt. Did my decree not reach Oakhaven, Croft? Gideon went pale. It was a matter of pack survival, my king. Abbott turned away from him, dismissing the Alpha entirely. He walked to the block where Lord Harlan stood. Harlan puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his aristocratic dignity. I have already purchased the beast, Your Grace, Harlan said, gesturing to the gold on the table. The transaction is complete. Even a king must respect the laws of commerce. Abbott looked at the bag of gold, then at the shivering white pup. He reached out, his massive, gauntleted hand gently resting on Finnick's head. The pup immediately stopped shaking, leaning into the warmth of the king's touch. You bought this pup? Abbott asked Harlan. For 150 gold crowns, Harlan affirmed. A fair price for a life, Abbott murmured. He turned his glacial gaze to the auctioneer. Bartholomew, tally the sum. The sum, Your Majesty. The sum of every cage, every chain, every slave, and every pelt in this wretched market, Abbott commanded, his voice finally rising, echoing off the canyon walls. Calculate the worth of every living soul currently standing on an auction block in High Cross. Bartholomew scrambled for his ledger, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his charcoal pencil twice. My king, that would be tens of thousands of crowns, an astronomical sum. Pay it from the royal treasury wagons, Abbott ordered his captain. The entire market gasped. Harlan took a step back, confusion twisting his scarred face. Your Grace, what is the meaning of this? It means, Lord Harlan, Abbott said, his silver eyes flashing with sudden predatory gold, that I have just bought the entire market. Every slave, every pup, every piece of flesh you thought to barter today now belongs exclusively to the crown. Abbott drew his sword, a massive broadsword forged of dark steel. The sound of the metal leaving the scabbard sang through the silent market. And since I now own this market, Abbott continued, his gaze shifting back to Gideon Croft, I am restructuring the management, starting with the removal of those who violate the king's law. Before Gideon could even shift his weight to run, Abbott swung the broadsword. The execution was flawless, brutal, and instantaneous. Gideon's head separated from his shoulders, tumbling into the mud as his massive body collapsed. The market erupted in screams, but a synchronized drawing of steel from the king's royal guard immediately quelled the panic. Harlan stumbled backward, tripping over his own cane and falling into the mud, crawling away in absolute terror. Abbott ignored the chaos. He sheathed his bloodied sword and stepped down from the platform. He walked directly to where Maeve was chained to the wagon. Duncan, the guard who had struck her, was already on his knees, weeping and begging for mercy. Abbott didn't even look at him. A royal guard dragged Duncan away by his hair. Abbott knelt in the mud before Maeve. Up close, his sheer size was overwhelming, but as he reached out to her, his movements were impossibly gentle. He took the heavy iron chain connecting her wrists and, with a sickening crack of pure, alpha strength, snapped the metal link in two. He took off his heavy, blood-red cloak and wrapped it around Maeve's trembling, bruised shoulders. You are safe, Abbott whispered, his voice vibrating with a warmth that completely contradicted the brutal violence he had just committed. No one will ever take him from you again. Maeve stared up into the face of the Iron King, her breath hitching as she smelled the crushed pine and heather radiating from him. The realization of what was happening, of the ancient, sacred bond clicking into place between them, left her speechless. Abbott stood, easily lifting Maeve into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He nodded to his captain. Burn this market to the ground, Abbott commanded. Free the captives, return them to their lands with provisions, and bring the white pup to my horse. We are going home. Snowdrifts piled high against the obsidian stone walls of Ironhold Keep, but inside the royal chambers, a roaring hearth kept the bitter winter at bay. For the first time in her turbulent life, Maeve Halloway woke up to the sensation of silk sheets and the soft, rhythmic breathing of her pup safe beside her. Finnick was curled into a pristine white ball of fur at the foot of the massive four-poster bed, his belly full of rich goat's milk and roasted venison. The festering cuts on Maeve's wrists, earned from Gideon's cruel iron shackles, were tightly bound in clean linen, smelling sharply of yarrow and medicinal honey. She was no longer a prisoner, nor was she a piece of meat on an auction block. She was a guest of King Abbott Steeves. Yet, the anxiety of her deeply ingrained Omega instincts refused to settle. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Abbott stepped into the chamber. He had discarded his blood-red royal armor for a simple, charcoal-gray tunic that stretched tightly across his broad chest. Without the crown and the steel, he looked less like a terrifying warlord and more like the man whose scent of pine and heather made Maeve's pulse flutter wildly. You are awake, Abbott observed, his silver eyes softening as he took in the sight of her sitting up in his bed. He carried a silver tray laden with fresh bread, sharp cheese, and spiced wine. You gave us your own chambers, Your Grace, Maeve murmured, instinctively lowering her gaze, the habit of a lifetime of submission hard to break. It is too much. An Omega does not belong in the king's bed. You are not merely an Omega, Maeve, Abbott replied, setting the tray down and sitting on the edge of the mattress. His massive weight made the bed dip. You are my fated mate. The moon goddess herself has tethered our souls. My chambers, my keep, my kingdom, they are yours. Maeve looked up, her breath catching. A king cannot mate with a widowed Omega. The noble houses will never accept it. I bring no dowry, no political alliances, no military strength. I only bring a pup from another man. Abbott reached out, his warm, calloused fingers gently tilting her chin up so she was forced to look into his glacial eyes. I possess enough military strength to conquer the entire continent, Maeve. I have no need for alliances. As for the pup, Abbott glanced affectionately at the sleeping white wolf. He is fierce. He survived the freezing mud of Oakhaven and the horrors of Highcross. I will adopt him. He will be raised as the crown prince of Ironhold. Tears welled in Maeve's eyes, but before she could express her overwhelming gratitude, a sharp, urgent knock interrupted the tender moment. Lord Chancellor Reginald, an older beta with a severely lined face and a sharp, calculating demeanor, pushed his way into the room, bowing stiffly. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty, but the Council has convened. We have an urgent diplomatic crisis on our hands." Abbott's jaw tightened. "Speak, Reginald." "It is the Rothschild Trading Guild, sire," Reginald said, citing the most powerful and ruthless financial syndicate in the Western Territories, a real-life powerhouse of commerce that controlled the neutral zones. They were the primary financiers of the Highcross market. By slaughtering Alpha Gideon and destroying the Bazaar, you have effectively severed their primary winter supply chain. Lord Harlan survived your purge. He has fled to the Rothschild bankers, claiming you violated the Habsburg Neutrality Treaty. Abbott stood up, his massive frame instantly radiating absolute, lethal authority. Harlan was purchasing a stolen nursing pup for a death pit. The Rothschild Guild can drown in their own gold before I allow such atrocities to occur on my borders. Reginald hesitated, glancing nervously at Maeve. "They are demanding reparations, sire. Furthermore, they are demanding the immediate surrender of the white pup to honor the original bill of sale, stating the Crown's confiscation was illegal. If we do not comply, they will cut off our grain imports. The kingdom will starve by February." "Let them try," Abbott snarled. "Assemble the generals. If the bankers want a war, they shall have one." As Abbott stormed out of the room to address his war council, Maeve felt a cold spike of terror pierce her heart. She was the cause of this. Her son was the catalyst for a war that could starve thousands of innocent people. For 3 days, the keep was a hive of chaotic military preparation. Maeve was largely confined to the royal wing, tended to by a quiet, unassuming handmaiden named Agatha. Agatha was a drab, older beta woman who brought Maeve her meals and helped bathe Finnick. On the 4th night, a blizzard struck the region, howling against the stained glass windows of the palace. Abbott was locked in the war room, finalizing a preemptive strike against the Rothschild mercenaries gathering at the southern border. Maeve sat by the fire, mending a tear in one of Abbott's heavy cloaks. Finnick was asleep in his wicker basket near the hearth. The exhaustion of the past week finally caught up to her, and Maeve's eyes drooped. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep in the velvet armchair. She awoke hours later to a chilling, unnatural silence. The fire had died down to glowing embers. The room was freezing. Panic, sudden and violent, seized Maeve's chest. She leaped from the chair and rushed to the hearth. The wicker basket was empty. "Finnick!" Maeve screamed, tearing through the royal chambers. She checked under the bed, behind the heavy tapestries, in the dressing room. Nothing. Then, she noticed the heavy oak door was slightly ajar. On the floor, near the threshold, was a single, muddy footprint, and lingering in the cold air, cutting through the scent of palace incense, was a smell Maeve would never forget. Stale blood, cheap perfume, and rotting wood. Lord Harlan. Agatha's betrayal clicked into Maeve's mind with sickening clarity. The handmaiden had purposely left the window unlatched in the adjacent corridor, bypassing the royal guards, allowing Harlan's assassins to infiltrate the royal wing. They didn't come to kill the king. They came to steal the prize that would appease the Rothschild bankers. A normal Omega would have fallen to her knees and howled for her Alpha. A normal Omega would have waited for the guards to organize a search party. But Maeve was a mother who had already watched her pup be sold into slavery once. She was not going to let it happen again. Her inner wolf, suppressed by years of starvation and pack submission, suddenly roared to life. Her bones cracked and shifted in a rapid, agonizing symphony. Within seconds, the fragile human woman was gone, replaced by a lean, heavily scarred timber wolf. Her coat was a muddy, unremarkable brindle, but her eyes blazed with the lethal, unhinged ferocity of a mother scorned. Without waiting for backup, Maeve leaped out the open window into the raging blizzard, her nose locked onto the faint, fading scent of her stolen pup. The blizzard was blinding, a chaotic swirl of white that froze the moisture in Maeve's lungs with every ragged breath. She bounded through the snowdrifts of the king's forest, her paws bleeding against the jagged ice hidden beneath the powder. Harlan and his men were heavy, slow, and arrogant. They believed the storm would cover their tracks and that the king's forces would take hours to mobilize. They didn't account for a solitary, desperate mother tracking them purely by scent and maternal instinct. Maeve caught up to them at the frozen expanse of the Blackwater River. There were 5 men in total. 4 were heavily armed mercenaries wearing the brass coin emblems of the Rothschild Guild on their cloaks. The 5th was Lord Harlan, riding a massive, shaggy warhorse. Slung over the saddle of one of the mercenaries was a heavy canvas sack. It was squirming. A high-pitched, muffled whimper echoed over the cracking ice. Finnick. Maeve didn't howl to announce her presence. She didn't posture or growl. She hit the mercenary carrying her son like a furry missile, sinking her teeth directly into the man's jugular. Blood sprayed hot and bright across the white snow as the mercenary collapsed, dropping the canvas sack. Maeve landed gracefully, immediately standing astride the wriggling bag, baring her teeth at the remaining men. Deep, guttural snarls ripped from her throat, saliva dripping from her bloody jaws. "The Omega!" Harlan shouted, pulling his horse back in shock. "Kill the bitch! Don't let her damage the merchandise!" The 3 remaining mercenaries drew their steel and lunged. Maeve was not a warrior. She was small and severely malnourished, but maternal adrenaline made her terrifyingly fast. She dodged a sweeping broadsword, clamping her jaws onto the attacker's wrist and snapping the bone with a sickening crunch. The man screamed, dropping his weapon, but a second mercenary kicked Maeve hard in the ribs. The sickening crack of her own ribs fracturing sent a shockwave of agony through her body. She tumbled across the ice, sliding dangerously close to a patch of thin black water. "Pin her down and take her head," Harlan commanded, drawing a heavy crossbow and aiming it at Maeve. Maeve struggled to her paws, her vision blurring, blood dripping from her muzzle. She placed herself squarely between the crossbow and the canvas sack holding her son. If she was going to die on this ice, she would die shielding him. Harlan smiled, his milky, blind eye catching the moonlight. He pulled the trigger. The heavy iron bolt soared through the air, aimed directly at Maeve's heart. Suddenly, a massive, towering shadow dropped from the cliffside above. A creature of nightmare and legend, an impossibly large, pure black dire wolf crashed onto the ice in front of Maeve. The crossbow bolt deflected harmlessly off the thick, armor-like fur of the beast's shoulder. King Abbott had arrived. The sheer size of Abbott's wolf form was paralyzing. He was twice the size of a normal werewolf, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, radiant gold light. The scent of enraged alpha rolled off him in suffocating waves, so powerful that 2 of the mercenaries' horses simply collapsed from sheer terror, throwing their riders onto the ice. The battle that followed was not a fight, it was a massacre. Abbott's jaws clamped around the torso of the nearest mercenary, tossing the fully armored man 50 feet across the frozen river like a rag doll. The second mercenary tried to flee, but Abbott was upon him in a heartbeat, his massive claws severing the man's spine before he could take a third step. The third man, the one with the broken wrist, fell to his knees weeping. Abbott crushed his skull with a single stomp of his massive paw. Harlan spurred his horse, desperately trying to flee back toward the neutral borders, screaming in terror. Abbott did not chase him. Instead, he let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the surrounding mountains. The sound was a concentrated shockwave of pure alpha dominion. Harlan's horse shrieked, bucking wildly and throwing the scarred lord onto the hard ice. Harlan scrambled backward, his cane lost in the snow, as the giant black wolf slowly stalked toward him. "Wait! Wait, Your Grace!" Harlan begged, coughing up blood. "The Guild! The Rothschilds will pay you. Name your price. I am a nobleman of the Southern Territories. You cannot." Abbott shifted back into his human form. He stood completely naked in the freezing blizzard, his muscular body radiating immense heat, his eyes still burning with that terrifying golden light. He didn't say a word. He simply reached down, grabbed Lord Harlan by the throat, and lifted the man off the ground with one hand. With a brutal, effortless twist of his wrist, Abbott snapped Harlan's neck. He tossed the lifeless body onto the ice, effectively ending the threat to his kingdom and his family. Abbott turned back to Maeve. She had shifted back into her human form, shivering violently in the snow, clutching the canvas sack to her bare chest. She had ripped the bag open, and Finnick, unharmed but terrified, was pressing his tiny white nose against her neck, whimpering softly. Abbott quickly retrieved his discarded heavy winter cloak from where he had left it on the cliffside and rushed to her. He wrapped the massive fur around both Maeve and Finnick, pulling them tightly against his burning hot chest. "I have you," Abbott whispered fiercely, burying his face in Maeve's snowy hair. "I am so sorry, my love. I should have protected you better." "I protected him," Maeve rasped, her voice weak but laced with undeniable pride. She looked up at the terrifying Alpha King, no longer seeing a monster, but the mate the goddess had promised her. "He is safe." "You fought like a queen," Abbott murmured, gently pressing a kiss to her bruised forehead, taking care not to jostle her broken ribs. "And you will be crowned as one. The realm will kneel to the Omega Queen, or I will burn the entire continent to the ground." The political fallout of Lord Harlan's death was swift and brutal. When King Abbott sent Harlan's severed head to the Rothschild Trading Guild in a lead box, along with the crests of their dead mercenaries, the bankers quickly realized that no amount of gold could shield them from the wrath of the Iron King. The Syndicate publicly denounced Harlan, dropped their demands for reparations, and signed a new trade agreement that heavily favored the crown. Back in the safety of Ironhold Keep, the winter slowly melted into a vibrant, blossoming spring. The social hierarchy of the Western Territories was forever shattered. In the Grand Cathedral of the capital, beneath the stained glass windows depicting the moon goddess, King Abbott formally claimed Maeve as his mate and his queen. The lords and alphas of the noble houses grumbled, deeply unsettled by the idea of bowing to an Omega. But when Maeve walked down the aisle, draped in silks of silver and crimson, radiating a quiet, unshakable resilience that had survived the worst cruelties of their world, the whispers died. Beside her walked Finnick, no longer a shivering captive, but a confident, proud white wolf pup who wore the royal crest on his collar. Maeve looked out at the sea of powerful alphas and calculating betas. She remembered the mud of Oakhaven. She remembered the chains of Highcross. She took Abbott's hand, feeling the unbreakable bond humming between them, and smiled. They had tried to break her to settle a debt. Instead, she had claimed the king, raised a prince, and rewritten the laws of the realm. Did the intense journey of Maeve from a helpless, indebted Omega to a fiercely protective, unstoppable queen leave you breathless? If you loved the thrilling drama, heart-stopping twists, and the ultimate triumph of a mother's unyielding love over a cruel medieval hierarchy, hit that like button right now. Share this epic story of resilience and fated mates with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible, cinematic storytelling delivered straight to your screen.